Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our final sessions this afternoon. So this is an action workshop session, and our speaker within this is Ed Suttie. Ed comes from the Building Research Establishment, where he's Director of Strategic Advisory. And this afternoon, he's going to be leading our workshop for us. And the title is Biophilic Design, Health, Nature, and Net Zero. So I will speak no further and hand over to Ed. So Ed, the floor is yours.
Very much, Will, and welcome to this workshop session on biophilic design. And you'll hear as we go through this afternoon how health, nature, and indeed net zero are very closely intertwined. So yes, my name is Ed Suttie. I'm a director within BRE, a large multidisciplinary science research consultancy and certification business, probably best known for BREEAM, our whole building assessment methodology, which is over 25 years old now, and pushing on the sustainability of our built environment. During my career, I've had the privilege and the pleasure of working on a number of programs that are connected to health and well-being, and specifically around biophilic design, but also about the role our buildings more generally, and also the materials that they're made of, come together and provide a healthy living and working environment for us as building occupants. What I'm going to talk to you about today are those sort of three words. So nature, we're going to look at biophilic design, the origins, context, etc. We're going to look at health, so obviously the impact on occupant health and well-being. I'm going to show you a little bit about the Biophilic Office project that we're engaged in at the moment, which is around measuring benefits. And some of the information that comes forward today is quite heavily workplace focused, but we do touch into other building typologies as we navigate through. And then critically, this piece about net zero, or this pathway to zero carbon, about how all this is really connected and how people, us, are the real key vehicles for unlocking this. And I use a little bit of my backstory here. So I've had 25 years in the world of forest products. So I use the example of wood as a material just to show how that kind of connects up. I'm also flagging here Oliver Heath Design, who we're indebted to as one of our partners around the programs on biophilic design. So we're firmly in the territory of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 3, good health and well-being. And it's probably worth reminding ourselves that this is multifaceted and layered. So across from planet health at the top end of the scale, down to our public health and our communities, down to our individual personal health, so physical, mental, and indeed our social health. And the world of buildings and health, it's a huge number of different factors at play here that can come together and impact on health and well-being in the built environment, not least security and fire safety, but issues around pollution, overheating, and noise. And we had a great presentation from Robert Bednar earlier yesterday, talking about biophilic architecture in practice. So that's the real big scheme stuff. I'm going to be looking a little bit more at the building inside itself. So biophilic design and its impact. Let's get a bit of a firm grounding about what it means and why it's important. Again, workplace focus, but stress-related illnesses are the primary cause of workplace sickness now. Depressive and anxiety disorders are a huge individual suffering, of course, but huge productivity and economic losses, 140 billion euros in Europe alone per annum. And alongside that, we've got these really interesting changes occurring. So we're urbanizing more than ever. So 90% urbanized now in the UK in 2018 compared to 79% in 1950. In some countries, it's even more stark than that, more ruralized countries becoming very heavily urbanized. 13% of our households are single person, age 65 or over. And, you know, those sorts of figures really put into context our built environment in the fact that we spend most of our lives in it, 90 to 95%, if you pick up transport as well, of our time indoors. And at the same time, you know, in my generation, we've seen a huge change in the way we work and the way we gather information. Most of us, most of our UK adults, we have smart technology. We're almost addicted. We have focused attention for huge parts of the day and even parts of the night. I think it's something like 30% of us, you know, look at our phones at night as well. So that's a real shift from how we've been used to living in our built environment and evolving with it. And I suppose that really all comes together in providing a huge disconnect from our natural world, from where we came from. And I rather like the remark that Robert made yesterday, because he talked about far away, so close. And nature is incredibly close to us, but we make it very, very far away by our focused attention on screens. And then alongside that, we've got huge change patterns now, brought along by the pandemic, from home working and the future of the workplace. So biophilic design actually has an incredible opportunity now to create workplaces, or indeed facilities for other purposes, that people want to be in, that want to be in there to collaborate, to communicate, and to meet. Some really great opportunity. As we know, people are remarkably contrary. We all know how bad a sedentary lifestyle is for us. The statistics speak for themselves. The extra 1 million deaths through physical inactivity in Europe. Yet 50% of us still do know what we would class as exercise per week. Accepting that fact that we're rather contrary, we have information, but we often don't do much about it. People are absolutely everything. And I think people are the unlocking in the sense of the movement and the initiatives around zero carbon pathways and our future. And I think it was Professor Anderson on yesterday, really stark presentation. 31 years of abject failure is how he reported our progress on carbon and the environment since the 1990 IPCC first report. But as I say, I think people are the unlocking ability here. This again was a really pivotal piece of work by the World Green Building Council that showed, in business terms, 90% of a typical office business is actually staff costs and salaries and benefits. So if your staff are underperforming or absent or for whatever reason, that's a huge impact on your costs and your productivity and your output. Yet we focused an awful lot on cutting rental costs and cutting energy costs, which are actually quite small in comparison. So we're going to try an interactive poll question. So our first question, 4 answers should pop up. Where do you feel relaxed and inspired? So if I could ask that poll to be launched. And I'll give you a few seconds to have a mull and click through. I'm now going to tune into Will. Have we got some results yet?
So not on my screen. I'm just connecting in with the backstage team to see. Ah, yes, I found the results. Okay, so the highest by far is By the Sea, 73.7%.
Wow.
Second up is At Home, 15%.
Mm-hmm.
On My Bike, 10%. In the Office, 0. So,
okay, well, maybe it's just a manifestation of our Plymouth heritage here by the sea. But the reality is, if I'd had 10 answers there, I'd be astonished if it wasn't some of the more nature-based environments that transferred this feeling of being relaxed and inspired. It's pretty rare that people talk about the workplace. Often, bikes and exercise, some physical activity is really positive. So we sort of inherently have our wealth of experiences personally and individually, that actually nature is quite a good place to be if we want to be relaxed and inspired. And this comes from rather cool principles, the savannah principle. And basically the premise here is that our psychology of our needs hasn't evolved as quickly as we've actually physically evolved. So the principles remain the same around human behavior, whether it's the savannah on the left-hand side or the library on the right-hand side, that they offer areas of open space, of viewpoints, of things that mimic nature. And our psychology is still craving that. We are part of nature. And as was talked about yesterday, this came to a real fore around the Biophilia hypothesis. A German-born American psychoanalyst he brought it first to the fore in the 1970s, but it was hugely popularized by Edward O. Wilson in his book Biophilia in 1984. A good read, I'd recommend it. And it's a very simple premise. We have a genetic connection to nature, yet we spend most of our time isolated or far from it. In addition, we know medically nature is good for us. So this picture is Shirin-yoku, so forest bathing, which is quite a popular term now in the UK. When I first talked about this, nobody had ever heard of it. But this is actually prescribed by physicians and GPs in Japan as part of a course of recovery and recuperation from operations, but also for treatment of very particular medical conditions. And it's starting to appear in the UK. And the principle there is go and immerse yourself in nature. Go for a walk in the forest as part of your recuperation. Right. Question 2, we have our thick and fast poll. So thinking about a building, can you select one thing that provides a strong connection to nature? Thinking about a building. So again, I'll give you 20 seconds or so. Have we got some answers there, Will? Some results?
They're still chalking up. Should we give it just a couple more seconds? They're still numbers are still climbing.
Okay, that's great. It's not quite the tension of your revision.
We've got 82% participation, 86. Yeah, I think we're going to get 100% if we give it 2 seconds.
Okay.
So overall, so we're coming in with view of nature from a window, 57%.
Yep.
Second up is plants with 24%. Natural light at 19%. And 0 for interior colours and form, which had I been able to do this, I would have ticked that one myself, actually.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, clearly views out a window are really, really important. Plants, very, very obviously, they are part of nature. The reality is all those things are really helpful components and part of the framework around biophilic design. So sound, texture, color, shape and form are definitely part of that. Natural light, absolutely. Direct connection to nature through plants, and indeed views and prospect of green and natural places, very, very strong. And this is, we don't have much time to go into it, but they're broadly gathered into 3 different groups. So there's a sort of direct contact with nature, so water, trees, plants, etc. There's evoking a sense of nature, so natural analogues like materials, like wood. And then there's human spatial response, which is about how we interact with that space, how it can be restorative or energizing, depending on its form and function. And the real Bible on this was developed by the Kaplins and Kellett and through Terrapin Bright Green, and it's still there. The 14 patterns of biophilic design that really group and categorize this. So again, if you'd like to know more, I really recommend you go and search that out and look at the detail behind those particular categories. Right, we're going thick and fast through the polls. We've got our next question, poll 3. So Again, this is workplace focused, but thinking about your main workplace, what change would make a positive difference to your day? So again, if you could just select one of those 4 options. How are we doing, Will? Are they ticking through?
Yeah, almost there. So a few more to come in. Okay, so we are, interestingly, oh, just shifted one more. Okay, there we go. So coming in at the top is more plants and greenery, but it's yeah, about 38% more plants and greenery. Then you've got reduced noise distraction at 28.6%, improved access to daylight at 23.8%, and ability to move subject to the task I'm doing or how I feel is 9.5%.
Okay, that's interesting. Again, I mean, they're all perfectly valid answers, and we tend to sort of reflect back on our own workplaces, our previous experience. Certainly, noise distraction is a really significant component of disturbance in open plan offices, but it can actually have a positive effect as well. Some personality and characters like that kind of more of a noisy environment for working in. But that's interesting. Thanks for doing that one. Again, if we sort of skip through briefly, so in European offices, this is again some quite terrifying data in a way. 42% of employees have no natural light. So that point about natural light absence is really important in impacting on health and well-being. 55 employees don't have access to any greenery. So that's either indoors or directly outside the space. And 7% have no windows at all. So in a purely artificially lit environment. And that's crazy, having gone through what we've just gone through already, and knowing and understanding the importance of nature to our mood, health, well-being, and the spin-offs that come from that. And the evidence is there from offices. So natural elements such as greenery and sunlight increase reported well-being, productivity, more creative, reduction in absenteeism. If we hop over to healthcare, this again was mentioned by Robert yesterday briefly. This is a really pivotal study by Robert Ulrich, who patients recovering from gallbladder surgery recovered faster, requiring less medication, feeling less pain in rooms that had views onto nature, as opposed to rooms with views onto car parks and an industrial landscape in the same hospital environment. So quite staggering, really. And the evidence is there from schools. Schools, it's often referred to as a pyramid of benefits. So students, staff, and indeed the establishment and the economy as a whole benefit from this. Faster learning where natural light is present. Improved performance where plants are present in rooms. Green walls improving acoustics in a space and reducing airborne particulates. And a reduced absenteeism per year per pupil. So the data is really gathering on that. And the picture there actually is this school in Oxfordshire. Really interesting sort of transition from indoor and outdoor space, natural light, acoustic panels, and wood as a material. So some great examples, but the question came up yesterday and it was really relevant about, well, can we just refurbish places? And absolutely we can refurbish places through biophilic design strategies. And again, I'm indebted to Oliver Heath here for these few slides. And there are different sort of cost points, of course, or intervention points. So low, medium, and high. So low are the simple things that can be done. Medium requires contractors. High requires major design and full-scale refurbishment. And if we just take a few examples at that low level, that direct connection to nature, absolutely, introduce desk plants. Indirect connection to nature could be about images of nature on the walls. And human spatial response could be about instigating communal meals for the teams within that workplace. Median is more fixed planting schemes and more fixed systems for greenery in the offices. Natural materials, timber walls, providing that indirect connection to nature. And human spatial response might be about zoning particular areas within a workplace for particular activities and tasks, and that ability to move between those spaces as part of your working strategy as an individual. And then, of course, right at the top end, direct connection to nature, fantastic living green wall features that might be inside buildings. Indirect connection to nature would be installing a circadian lighting system, so a lighting system that really tunes into the natural daylight cycle. And human spatial response would be about designing with mezzanines and viewpoints, creating prospect and spaces within your interior. So the next poll is just to give a really sort of a simple word, really. What are your feelings for your main workplace? So poll number 4, and we'll give that a little while just to come through. I could only select 4 options. When I've done these kind of studies in person, obviously I can ask people directly, but if I've done it online before, I've had sometimes 7 or 8 different options, but see which one of the 4 best fits to your workplace or your working environment. How's it going, Will?
Yeah, we're getting close. A few more votes. Okay, so we're 90%. Oh, we're up. So 85.7% say it's okay. 9.5 boring. 4.8 uplifting, and 0 fun.
Okay, that's really interesting, because the okay, I think, is a real sort of telling point, in the sense that we manage. You know, we're human beings. We manage. We surely have got experiences where we thought things might be better, but you know, we get a contract, we go to work. This is where you work. Hey, it's okay. But certainly it can be improved. But I'm very delighted that a few people said uplifting as well. So that's really fantastic. But yes, not particularly scientific, but it's really interesting to start thinking about, you know, some of those kind of touch points from our experiences and our real practical experience. So now I'd like to jump on to tell you a little bit about the Biophilic Office project and what that's doing and how that's helping around measurement. And I've mentioned circadian lighting already. So the foundation for this project came to the fact that, for example, this is one topic where, you know, there's been intense research around the natural light rhythm and cycle for us as human beings, compared and contrasting with the artificial lit environment, to the point now where there are full biodynamic lighting systems available that mimic this circadian lighting indoors, in terms of the intensity and the color of the light. Alongside that, there's a wealth of sort of certification opportunities about the health and well-being of our built environment, our interiors. And if we skip, again, this is just an office. It could have been hundreds of different ones, but this happens to be an office in Trondheim that has been designed with a bit of thought around noise reduction, visual aesthetic, and promoting health and creativity, and different task environments for people to move to depending on what they're doing. So some pretty good aspects of biophilic design that have been incorporated into this new build. However, I contrast it with this image, which is probably what a lot more of us are familiar with as our offices, and indeed up and down the country and indeed across Europe. Yeah, we've got a huge legacy of office stock. So our real interest in research and work is, well, how can we impact these sort of more mundane or everyday buildings, and what can we do for them in terms of bringing biophilic design in and improving the health and well-being of the occupants. And as I've used the word personal a couple of times now, so if we went round the table or the virtual room and thought about, well, what defines a great indoor environment, we'd probably come up with a whole range of things that were broadly similar. It would be about natural light versus artificial light. It would be about thermal comfort, acoustic comfort, air quality, airflow, view, colour, etc. But the reality is quite a few of those can be quite personal. And probably the most classic is about thermal comfort. If you've ever shared an office, a larger space office, you'll find a diversity of people feeling different temperature perceptions at the same air temperature within a built environment. So I think this is our, yes it is, this is our last poll question. So question number 5. So this is a little bit about, again, it's your sort of working life, as it were, about where you feel most productive. So we'll just call them out when you're happy.
Yeah. Seconds. So overall, we've got at home at the top with 50%.
Mm-hmm.
Then we've got single occupant office, 23.8%. Open plan office or space, 19%. And coffee shop, 9.5%.
Okay, and I think I've done a similar sort of poll certainly before the pandemic, and I think what we're seeing here at productivity at home has just, the whole narrative has changed dramatically with last year, and I think we've all found many of the benefits of working from home and being able to have flexibility and adaptability around that, but also perhaps some of the challenges. So that's really interesting that home is top of the bill. I mean, if we hadn't had the pandemic, I'm not sure where that would have appeared on the rating. But and then single office. So yeah, we like our private space. We know, or perhaps we don't know, when we need to be, have quiet to be able to concentrate, and when we need to be able to meet people. And open plan is pretty low down. Open plan is really interesting because obviously it's fantastic for lots of things, for cooperation, that serendipity of interacting with people, for creativity, but it can be more difficult if you're in a very sort of concentrating environment. Okay, so that's great. Thank you for doing that, everybody. Interesting pointers. So the premise behind the office project was to grow and deepen this evidence base for the impacts of biophilic design or health well-being and the spin-offs, as it was an office, around productivity. But it was very much focused on the sort of practical interventions that would be suitable for the refurbishment of those sorts of office interiors that I showed you a bit earlier. Great range of partners from different technology areas, from biodynamic lighting to colour to acoustics, green walls, plants, furniture, etc. And we've done on a few buildings actually now, campus site in Watford, quite an intense materials and services inventory. Really helpful stuff to do prior to any refurb, to understand what you've got there already. But then the key for all this evidence gathering is obviously about measuring and monitoring. And no surprises, it really focuses heavily on the indoor environment quality. So that includes air quality, so temperature, humidity, CO2, and volatile organic compounds. It heavily focuses on daylight levels and the impact of artificial light at eye level, working desk level, and window level. It focuses on the acoustic environment. As we've discussed already, distracting noise can be a really compounding factor in people's ability to work in open plan offices, which these largely are. But the real sort of the turning point or the pivotal bit of information is about occupants. So how are people responding to this? And that's done through three different approaches, through looking at psychology, so through questionnaires, tools, cognitive tasks, and interviews for individuals, and through physiology, so biomarkers for stress hormone analogues and the use of wearable technology, and productivity measures. So what are the outputs from the teams within those environments, and how can we measure those against, bulk of things like HR data for absenteeism and sick leave and so on. So that sort of collation provides the contrast to the hard data, if you like, about the environment. I'm really excited to tell you we're kind of a month too early, but next month we'll be opening our Biophilic Office demonstrator. So the image top left is our innovation park in Watford, and we've converted one of our smaller buildings there into a demonstrator for the principles of biophilic design in an office. And the reason is we want more people to engage with this, and biophilic design, it is holistic. It's about a whole range of different things, as we've seen already, coming together. And it's something that has to be experienced. You have to sort of step inside it to perhaps see or understand how your existing office or workplace, or indeed home, might be better, and not just okay, we could maybe make it a bit better. So that'll be launching in July, and when we get back to more full access to the site, obviously we'd be welcoming visitors to that. And the other thing I'd like to take note of is we're sort of loosely gathering through our interactions a network of expertise in universities, companies, and other institutions. The real focus here on joining up knowledge, experience, and data, and how things can fit together, where other studies are going on, how we can use that data to help inform the evidence base. And it's also about opportunities to validate innovations. I mean, on screen here, we've got the OpenFace mood recognition software that's being used at Cambridge University Lab. So looking at piloting some of those systems around mood recognition for office workers. So great interest and opportunities. Be really pleased to hear from others that might be out there. So on to our sort of final slice for the day. So on zero carbon, and I mentioned right at the beginning that I was going to use that about, well, how's all this come together as an example of wood and timber in buildings? And I mentioned already that I think the people aspect, so we kind of understand, or we certainly have views on health and well-being, our own personal health and well-being. That as a route into broad sustainability and indeed pathway to zero carbon is really, really exciting and interesting. And it starts to mobilize lots of different things. And that's happened in the world of wood. So an area that I have some expertise and experience in, and I've done various bits of research and gathering evidence and information around the impact of timber in healthy buildings, and is it, you can see, is it good for your health? So primarily what we've done is we've looked at, if you think about building occupant health and well-being, as we've been discussing through biophilic design, the material wood itself can provide all sorts of different potentials. This indirect connection with nature, one of those biophilic qualities, visual variety, aesthetic, hygrothermal mass, this ability to modulate indoor temperature and humidity peaks and troughs, but can also impact in other areas. So the building environment around indoor air quality, the acoustics, thermal comfort, and indeed for the occupant around their own personal comfort. So it's a very sort of multifaceted web almost of how these things start to interact. And this is just thinking about health and well-being as a driver. And over the years, we've tested a number of hypotheses. So the first we've tested was people have positive attitudes towards wood in interiors when given the options of choices between materials. And that was as consumers or as construction professionals and different groups. And indeed, there is very strong research evidence for wood preference. Our second was wood has a positive impact on human psychology and physiology. And here it's definitely partial evidence. I mentioned the study in the healthcare environment of the recovery rates from operations. There are equivalent, very strong studies conducted in Austria and school pupils in classrooms that have wood present and that don't in the same academic year in the same schools, and some very compelling evidence there. But they are fragments, so the evidence still needs to be gathered and built. And the third hypothesis is about wood is specified for its health and well-being qualities. And I've just labelled that as starting soon. So in the UK, that is absolutely true. In other territories, so here we are in Canada, it is fundamentally being specified for all its other functionalities, but the benefits around health and well-being in interiors is noted and is part of the story in these various healthcare facilities in Canada. And similarly, if we flip across to Australia, Planet Arc are a great source of sort of compilations around these kind of subject matter on wood, housing, health and humanity. So a similar story to Canada, really. So wood really being specified for its functionalities, but also for the qualities it brings in terms of colour and interior and aesthetic and hygrothermal mass. So those other qualities and connection to nature and health and well-being. Whereas if we look at the UK, here's a range of sort of timber-rich interior buildings built over the last sort of some perhaps 10 years, and none of these took forward any of these notions around health and well-being. It was very much about functionality. It certainly was about interior aesthetic, but I think there's a very significant opportunity here about understanding how people perform, occupants react, function within these different buildings to gain a bit of that user evidence about the impacts of those materials on health and well-being of occupants. And I think in summary, it's quite interesting if you look just purely at this one touch point around a material and indoor environment, which we know is so critical to health and well-being, that it can impact across three main categories. So mind, comfort and air, through aesthetic, the hygrothermal mass, the dampening of noise, impacts on odour. So those sort of qualities that are starting to be recognised in other countries and are emerging in terms of conversation now here in the UK, having quite an interesting impact. And an example of this is we've been involved in the Riverside Sunderland University Design Challenge run by Moby and Sunderland City Council and parts of the timber industry on a housing design project that's now got to 8 shortlisted entries that are going through a live presentation process next week, actually. Very much the drive here was around zero carbon, and this point I made right at the beginning about everything being very strongly connected here. You know, clearly people want to live in a home that doesn't compromise health and well-being. We know from what we've seen so far that wood products can provide this indirect connection to nature and thus unlock health and well-being benefits for occupants. And if that's our entry point, because that's a conversation point, that's a personal experience, that's a people thing, that people understand, they value, and they want to specify in future, then the spin-off is you get all those other benefits with it. So the benefits of the material in off-site manufacture, in its embodied carbon, in its social value, its operational carbon of the the building itself or the house, and helps on this pathway to zero carbon. So very interconnected, a slightly different way around of looking at how we might tackle it, but coming at it from the point of view of people and health and well-being. So just to sort of wrap up before we move to questions, again, the questioning was quite clear yesterday about practicality and intervention. And here's a few of those biophilic qualities that we have spoken about. And you can see I've put some in the definitely column. There are certainly things that can be done low cost or at standard refurb of any space around colours, patterns, zoning if it happens to be an office, inclusion of texture or points of interest, and the magic of plants. One of the best examples of plants I had was a large office agency in central London asked every member of staff to bring a plant in the following week, and most people did. And suddenly the office turned into quite an interesting jungle, as you might imagine. But it actually spurred a lot of conversations and responsibility, and it improved communication between teams. And indeed, the office looks amazing as well. And then clearly there are some that are maybe the view and prospect and the perspectives inside are more difficult to change. Human-centric lighting can be deployed, but that might be out of the budget, and acoustic controls can be deployed. It's pretty unlikely we're going to do major whole-scale interruptions to thermal and airflow diversity, those sorts of senses that would be stimulated if we were standing outside and would be feeling and sensing those. And it's very hard for us to change the view from the window, of course, and integrate water unless it's in a large aquarium. So some very practical things. And my final thought really is we've mentioned a few times the sort of personal aspect of much of this, about how we interpret and how we perceive spaces and thus how we respond in them. And those are all related to these mind, comfort, light and air, these sort of whole qualities around indoor environment control. But the thought perhaps to leave you with is about your professional self, either where you are now or where you'll be in future, and how your role can help influence that and create those better spaces for people to live and work in. And I wholeheartedly agree with the remark made again yesterday, I think, about it's our responsibility to educate clients. We do consultancy work with clients to educate them about health and well-being in interiors, opportunities to incorporate biophilic design. So that's my final slide. Thank you very much indeed for your attention and participation.
Excellent. Many thanks. We've got some echoing. Thank you very much for that talk. It was, yeah, really fascinating, and the interaction worked really well. We've got some questions that come up in the question and answer box. So if people have further questions, please use that. I'm going to kick off with a question about how we can persuade, or how can we persuade local enterprises and employers, both large and small, that biophilic design is worth it. And I wonder if I could follow up that with something that was on my mind as well, is that particularly in the public sector space, how can you convince funders that that's something that should be added in?
Yeah, I think there's quite a sort of common notion that, you know, to do anything in this space requires significant additional budget. And I think the real strong point to get across is that if a building is being built, then that's one thing, and the interior and fit out can be absolutely created within the same budget you would put down a blue floor tile and paint the wall white. You know, that sort of principle, it is very much there. And indeed in refurbishment as well, I would say that opportunity is exactly the same. I think we absolutely need to keep communicating the benefits. So what are the benefits? Where's the evidence that this makes any difference? I would say, and I often ask audiences about whether the people they work for have ever asked them about the workplace? Have you ever completed a survey about how you feel in your workplace or interact with it, or how it might be improved? That is increasing, but it used to be a staggeringly low number of people were ever asked about it. So I think employers and HR folk, we need to get better aware of that as a real influencing factor about how people behave and perform. And if they're listened to, and if their indoor environment can be improved, you'll reap benefits for it.
I remember reading an article about green space. I think it's a study that had been done in Sweden, and they'd actually put a monetary value on the improvements in productivity. Are audits ever done like that for companies, where you could look at the productivity across the workforce and actually turn it into a monetary value and then turn that into a business value?
Yes, absolutely. So you're right, the Chief Financial Officer is the pivotal person here. So yes, that can be done. In some environments it is perhaps simpler than others. A very simple way is looking at sort of absenteeism data, and changes that will occur there, or actually just the real cost of that absenteeism, if you think about those stress-related components that go with the sick leave as well. So yes, there are some studies available that have put those calculations together. It's very, very different, of course, depending on the business type that's involved. But if you look at sort of days lost, that's a very simple way of doing it. But if you look at the upshift in output, so if you've got a service level agreement area within your business, you can quite readily monitor the progress of work items through that and the speed of them and the errors that are within them as well. That's one of the things we've been doing in one of our studies, for instance. And that then can be related to a cost. You're avoiding wasted time because you're doing things a bit quicker with less errors.
Yeah. So here's a question that challenges a little bit more. Is there a danger we create a green prison cell at work if biophilic design is not tied to an increased workplace flexibility and exercise?
Yeah, I think it's definitely not the intention. Absolutely, thinking about sort of workplace design and biophilic design as a component of that, it has to be of the place and of the environment around it, first of all. So it's got to link to that outdoor space. It's got to link to the occupants of that. There is not necessarily one size fits all, and some things may well have greater impact than others. But the ability for people to move and to choose where they want to go and work, exercise, community is a really, really important part of biophilic design, actually. So some of those spatial response things would be about a team or a floor in an office building going on, collectively understanding more about local nature or wildlife, or how to look after plants, or have more of those sort of communal experiences as well. And that gets them into exercise as well. Absolutely, really important part of how we encourage people to take more exercise in a safe and outdoor environment.
Thank you. The next question up, is there a change in design law over air quality? We have cleaning products for air conditioning in enclosed no window spaces, and the particulates cause many of us asthma issues and other health issues.
That's a really interesting question. So I don't know the exact answer to that. There are regulations and guidance, obviously, on workplace limits for all sorts of things, and indeed lighting and thermal comfort, etc. They are no way near enough regulated. But what's really interesting is through the pervasive use of smartphones and apps, we're getting a lot more data in our own personal hands about what the environment around us is like, and that's even starting to include CO2 and elements connected to indoor air quality as well. So the reality is that an employer it's going to have to move in that direction of monitoring and ensuring good, high-quality indoor air quality in this specific case, to encourage and to maintain and to hold on to the teams and the staff that they already have.
Thank you. I'm getting a really bad echo from my side. I hope it's not coming through on the whole live feed. But you can hear me. Okay, you can hear the questions. Okay, is that right? Yeah, good. I'm just thinking about a couple of. There's no more questions in the box at the moment, but I'd like to invite the audience. We've still got a few minutes to put any more questions in. But at the moment, I'm trying to think across it, sort of parallels into my world in river basin management. There's a couple of possible. One, just first of all, linked to what you were saying just now about the individuals feeling about their space. In environmental management, there's a couple of nice apps. There's one actually developed at the University of Plymouth called Rate My View, where you can take with your smartphone, you can take a shot, and then you can sort of add some commentary to it. But then actually the different ingredients of that view within the landscape can then be used in a semi-quantitative way to evaluate the environmental quality of that landscape. There's ideas about developing that into riverscapes, and so we can actually use, I guess in this case, it's using citizen scientists to go out and capture image data that can be translated into environmental quality perceptions. I wonder whether there's potential there for the individual to be empowered in terms of helping steer employers into improving the workspace by some kind of similar app that might collect semi-quantitative data and give them some kind of a lever by which to bring change in their own environment.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. I mean, when we go through our sort of refurbishment works, we take images at desk space level. Of course, the world we're going back into now is changing dramatically in terms of what will actually need to be there, and probably fixed desks won't necessarily be part of it. But yeah, that's a really interesting idea. You could imagine a series of qualities associated with that image, including distance to natural light and what's the lighting over your head and various other things that could be somehow codified or captured as part of that process. Yeah, really interesting idea.
Yeah, sort of image and metadata. I think that's how the app works in the landscape version. So yeah, something I'll pass that on actually to the apps team. That one, it might be something that's worth pursuing.
Yeah, I'll happily have a chat with somebody about that.
Yeah. The other thing that was crossing my mind on the sort of how do we fund these things, and certainly I like the idea of that sort of cost benefit and trying to get financial officers involved in business cases and so on. In the public sector, where it may be a bit more challenging, I wonder whether, again, just translating to my, because I'm not by no means an expert in buildings at all, other than that I sit in them all the time. But in the environmental world, when we try to implement some kind of management or solution, sort of restoration solution, sometimes the overall goal might be one of for recreational well-being, say to improve the wetlands and have some boardwalks and people to enjoy nature. But funding it via that route is quite challenging. And so what the environmental managers, particularly the Rivers Trust here, do is they think about where are the other wins in terms of carbon, maybe in terms of water quality improvement. And then they go to companies or organizations that do have funding to provide that ecosystem service in order to find the funding to pay for the scheme, which then brings about the intended benefit of recreation and well-being. And I wonder whether there's something that in that space, I'm just sort of thinking out loud really, in terms of, we call that, so that's called term payment for ecosystem services, and you basically find who's willing to pay or capable of paying. And I wonder if there's something, thinking more collect sort of across the wider piece, think of all public sector buildings, could there be some work done where the collective benefit to society is assessed at that broader scale, which allows somehow finances to be levered from a different source to actually fund improvements in buildings to improve well-being, which then improves the productivity.
Yeah,
so across that scale rather than thinking building scale. Do you ever think across the whole sector?
No, yeah, absolutely. So one of my earlier slides had that kind of buildings and health kind of connection, and it's very, very multi-faceted. As I said, fire safety, security, air pollution, etc. So yeah, I mean, some of the things we have done, not connected to biophilic design, but connected to things like fuel poverty. So we operate and have for 50 years the housing stock modelling for England, and what we do with that is we identify for the whole country or for regions or particular jurisdictions properties that are liable to be in that fuel poverty threshold based on the people that live there and the fabric of the building, literally, etc., and the energy use. So all that kind of multivariate analysis, if you like. And that's one thing. But what we can then do and have done is then translate that into the health and well-being arena by looking at what is the true cost of poor housing. So housing that typically is in those fuel poverty brackets or other typologies, and translate that into the cost pressures that are put on the NHS, for instance, around dealing with the outworkings, the symptoms that come out of people living in quite poor housing environments. So that idea of collating things on to get that bigger picture impact, which then the local authority can use and say, well, look, we need to do something about this because actually it's going to lift people feel poverty, it's actually going to save the NHS was in the patch X amount as well, connected to that, connected to these particular conditions. So it's a really sort of joined up approach.
Thank you. I'm sorry. On my side, I was getting quite a lot of interference there, so I could pick up the gist of your answer. I guess from a research point of view, thinking in the higher education world, it really emphasised the importance of interdisciplinary working and interdisciplinary thinking and bridging across from architecture into health and so on. And I think that there are real wins in there.
Yeah, I think for me it's really layering on practicality as well. Because even in buildings I showed these examples of bespoke buildings, but we laser in on what's the everyday, what are the solutions that can be most implemented. And that's very, very true. A lot of architecture now in this country focuses on energy, that's those opportunities to have a bit of well-being in as well as just energy efficiency.
Excellent, thank you, Ed. Well, I think there are no further questions in the box. I've got somebody looking here for a tennis racket, and we're actually up against time. So on that note, I will say thank you very much. It's been a really stimulating session, and I think loads of really interesting points for us to take home. And I think certainly linking that research into practice has been a really important theme of this session. So many thanks for that, and look forward to hearing more about how this work goes in the future.
Okay, great.
Thanks very much, and thank you again to the audience for the participation. Really appreciated.